Thank you for joining us. I'm Rick Harnish. I'm the Executive Director of the High Speed Rail Alliance. And I want to thank you all for joining us today, and thank you very much to our members. So for those who are new to our organization, we are a member-supported nonprofit, and we help people understand what American high-speed rail can be and how great it can be, what steps need to happen in order to make it happen. And then we give our members the tools they need in order to persuade leaders in their state capitals and in DC that this is something that should happen, and let's make it work. So if you like these programs, if you like the ideas of getting on an on-time electrified train and being in your destination within hours on a very predictable way, go to our website at highspeedrail.us and hit the Become a Member button, even if you already are a member. One of the most important projects in the country is fixing Penn Station. It's both the busiest station in North America by far, and it also sets the tone for how we do investment across the country. There's been a lot of proposals to fix it, lots of laments about why it hasn't been fixed. And the current presidential administration has decided to take a different approach. So we thought it was a great idea to have a good discussion about what should that approach be, since we've got an opportunity to influence the direction. So Chris Ott up in Madison is our deputy director. And Chris, if you'd be kind enough to introduce our speaker.
Sure thing. Thanks, Rick, and thanks everybody for being here. Blair Lorenzo is the executive director of the Effective Transit Alliance, an organization seeking to bring technically oriented, internationally inspired transportation planning and advocacy to the greater New York area. Blair is a professional urbanist and writer who has been studying cities and what makes them work for most of her adult life. Her work has long focused on the vital importance of transportation for urban function, including how transit shapes cities and the interaction between transit and the public realm. The Effective Transit Alliance's communications manager, Hunter Bickle, introduced us a couple of months ago, and we're happy that Blair agreed to have this conversation today about the future of Penn Station. For everyone in our audience, if you have a comment, you can put it in the chat. Please also feel free to share where you're joining us from today if you'd like. And if you have a question, it helps to keep those separate, so please use Zoom's Q&A feature for questions. We'll get to as many of those as we can after the presentation. With that, Rick and Blair, please take it away.
Excellent. Go ahead, Blair.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rick and Chris, and thank you everyone at the High Speed Rail Alliance. It's great to be here. Just want me to get my things up. There we go. Appreciate it. So let's get right into it. As Rick said, we've all seen the renderings floating around, whether we know exactly what's going on or not, of all the different plans out there to fix Penn Station, to change Penn Station. And these are all, what they have in common is that they're all grand architectural statements with price tags to match, and that's great. This is a, major part of New York City. As Rick said, this is the busiest train station in the Western Hemisphere, and it, is the gateway to New York. And just operationally, it is the linchpin for all rail in the Northeast. Everything that goes through from Boston to Washington goes through Penn Station. So, we've all seen the renderings, we've all seen the plans, and I'm sure lots of people have lots of opinions on which ones they like most and which ones they don't. But, whatever you think of these, one thing in common is a lot of the conversation out there and a lot of the stuff we see is all about making Penn a better place. That's a great goal. That's a fine goal, but a lot of this discussion does not talk about increasing capacity through Penn, increasing and making the station more functional, both for riders and for operations, which is the key to having fast, frequent trains that people actually ride. This is especially important right now. For those who don't know, we're just getting started on this $16 billion project called the Gateway Program that we'll do a bunch of improvements, but the main thing about it is it will double the number of tunnels under the Hudson into Penn Station, from 2 to 4. Um, and this should be a major improvement to transit both across the country. I mean, every train that goes into New York pretty much goes through here, with some exceptions, as I'm sure those who really know the service will know. Um, and there this should be a major chance to boost service, but we haven't really had a good talk about how to maximize the capacity of Penn Station, and that's why we're here. Um, Rick and Chris did a great job introducing us at ETA. We are bring technically inspired analysis. If you've heard of us, you might have heard of us for pushing the MTA to build a tunnel through All Faith Cemetery rather than running street lining for their new Interborough Express project. We've also done lots of things about rail decarbonization and how the right thing to do is to electrify trains, and this is the right things. Um, and this is what we do and why we are here. Um, so I think it helps to give us a real understanding of what we're dealing with and why Penn Station is in the situation it is. So, Penn Station was built in 1910 by the Pennsylvania Railroad, and it was primarily designed for one operator. Um, it was, at the time, the Pennsylvania Railroad owned the Long Island Railroad, so they were kind of one thing. It was built to be well, it has tracks going in and out of both sides. It was mostly meant to be a terminus for both intercity and commuter trains. Uh, and, you know, most infamously, it was demolished. The original building on top, the head house, was demolished in 1963 in an act of what most people consider to be architectural vandalism, to be replaced with Madison Square Garden on top. What this has led to is decades of accretion, because while this was going on, the station had to keep operating. The station never stopped. And so the actual platforms and everything underground at Penn Station uh, is basically the original with some modifications. Um, and so since then, there have just been years of of complexity on complexity of different things. I mean, even the ownership structure of Penn is very complex. Today, it is owned by Amtrak as the successor to the Pennsylvania Railroad through a long, complicated chain of things. And that's an odd situation because Amtrak is actually the smallest tenant at Penn Station compared to New Jersey Transit and the Long Island Railroad. Um, and ever since there's been a mess of renovations. There's been in the 90s, Amtrak did a bunch of renovations to its spaces, which made them nicer, and it added the central concourse, but it was still, as you can see, really cramped and ugly and buried under there. In 2002, New Jersey Transit got its own concourse, and obviously in 2021, the Moynihan Train Hall opened. Um, you know, each of these improvements made the station better in various ways, but and they did increase the capacity in terms of adding more stairs and elevators and escalators to the platforms, but they didn't really do much to the fundamental operating platform paradigm of the station. Station still has the same platforms underneath that it had in 1910, and you know, this is one of those things that even if Penn Station originally hadn't been torn down, we'd still be having this conversation because we'd still be running into the exact same issues with getting enough trains through the station that we need to. Now, as I've said at the beginning, Penn Station has train lines coming in at both sides, and this is something that gives it an ability that few other stations have, the ability to run trains through rather than just terminate them. Uh, weird thing, I want to take you across. You've probably heard of the Elizabeth line in London. Uh, you know, Opening in it was a 19 billion pound, $24 billion project that took trains that once terminated on either side of central London and built a tunnel through the middle of the city. And now trains run all the way from one side of Greater London, actually outside Greater London, all the way outside of Greater London. Um, And the result of this was a massive ridership boost, even in this post-COVID world where, and Europe transit ridership has been higher and has rebounded from the pandemic higher than US ridership. But even in that environment, it's been remarkably successful. You're seeing 600 to 700,000 people every day riding the Elizabeth line. Um, the Elizabeth line's paradigm is not new. It's based on work that was done with Berlin in the 1930s and then was repeated in Paris in building the RER in the 1970s. The whole idea was to take disconnected commuter trains on either side of the city, and rather than have them stop on either side, they would build a tunnel that would allow the trains to run through. Uh, it essentially kind of erased this artificial barrier between a commuter train and a metro train. It kind of turned into uh, almost express trains or super express trains, if you want to view it. And they've been remarkably successful. So why is that? Well, and why were cities and places interesting in through running in the first place? Um, Simply put, it is slow and expensive to turn around trains in the middle of a city. In the middle of a city is the most expensive land you're ever going to have. It's the most expensive place you're ever going to have, your most expensive station. Tracks are expensive, time is expensive, and it requires a lot of tracks to turn them. Um, if you don't turn trains around and you run trains from one side of the city to the other, you move those slow turnarounds to far less busy places outside. Uh, it, that maximizes that not well. First thing that does is it increases capacity because you no longer have trains sitting around, waiting to be turned around, emptying completely out, getting cleaned out, finished, turned around, and go. It makes the it increases capacity, and that makes the best use of your super expensive central infrastructure, your central stations, these massive downtown things. And it has a secondary benefit that is almost just as good. Uh, it allows more service. It creates a regional network by connecting places on both sides of the metro area, opening up a whole new range of trip options that would have once required probably a transfer, probably multiple and often painful transfers. Instead, you might be able to take a train from one side of town to the other on frequent trains with maybe one train transfer. And what's amazing is, well, other cities are spending billions and billions of dollars to do this. We can through run at Penn right now. The tracks come in one side and they go out the other. In fact, trains are ready through run at Penn. Most Amtrak trains, at least many Amtrak trains through run at Penn, they go from Boston down into Penn and down to Washington or vice versa. We've done it before with commuter trains or specialty trains, like during football games, we used to have a service where Metro North trains would go all the way through Penn Station to serve the Meadowlands. There had to be a transfer in New Jersey, but the idea is clear that you could run trains all the way through. We can have this thing that would massively increase the capacity of Penn Station just by doing this. I don't want to say that there aren't some technical challenges to doing this there, and we can talk about them, but those are relatively minor and easily solvable. The real issues are both political, to get the states of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut to agree to cooperate and push for change, as well as organizational, uh, to get some very set in their ways organizations to figure out new ways of doing things, operate differently than they have been before. Because if we can unlock through running at Penn, it would massively unlock space for these new gateway tunnels. We could our work has demonstrated that these new the four tunnels under the Hudson will eventually be able to allow 48 trains per hour into and out of Penn Station. And our work has shown that with through running, Penn can handle it right now, which gives us paying for more frequent commuter service but also more frequent intercity service, more frequent Acela and regional service across the Northeast. Um, and, and, the truth of the matter is, we might want, as I started with those architectural plans, we may well want to change the architecture of Penn. Penn has a lot of issues. That's great, but that should always, spending on architecture in this case is not does not necessarily come with direct transportation value. And we want to make sure that if we're doing this, we are actually increasing transportation value while spending all this money to improve things. And that's got to be true whatever we do architecturally with the buildings on top. So up until this point, up until just a couple months ago, when Secretary Duffy kind of canceled everything going on and took over everything back into the federal government, there were two projects going on at Penn Station, or that were planned to go on at Penn Station. They're often conflated, but they are separate, and it kind of helps to consider them as separately. The first was a $7 billion plan called Penn Reconstruction. This was run by New York State under, Amtrak said to New York State, if you want to do this, you can go ahead and do it. And it would have rebuilt the concourses. It would have done a lot of these architectural things made for better spaces. If you've been to Penn Station of late, it would have used the same approach that has been done on their refurbished Long Island Railroad concourse or the new Western concourse over by the Moynihan Train Hall. This does add, some circulation improvements, but like Moynihan before it, maybe some vertical circulation improvements. It doesn't do much to improve the capacity of the station, which is the fundamental issue. Amtrak's answer to this was a project they called Penn Expansion. This was also, at least as far as I'm aware, canceled as part of this scenario, but the government taking over, but the federal government taking over. What they wanted to do was rip down an entire block of Midtown Manhattan, the so-called Block 780 between 7th and 8th and 31st and 30th, which is on the screen right now, and rebuild a whole new set of, platforms for trains, and massively expand the station. The price tag for this would be $17 billion, more than the cost of even Gateway, which is a incredibly expensive project. Originally, this was going to be paid for by office development around Penn, but that all got sidelined by the downturn in the office market post-COVID. And Amtrak's justification for spending all this money was their study that said, no, Penn Station, can't handle through running. So we need to build these massively expensive expansion of the station because through running will not solve the problems and not provide the capacity we need. In essence, Amtrak wanted to do exactly what all these other cities like London and Paris and Berlin were trying to avoid, building an expensive train station instead of changing the way they operate trains. This is kind of our version of a classic Swiss phrase that has been used called organization before electronics before concrete. It's this paradigm that's not necessarily just about lowering costs, but also about how to get the most out of our investments. It says, if we can improve something by changing the organization and operations first, we should do that first. And then maybe we spend some time on electronics, be that modeling for stations to pick the best things to do, or signals, or that sort of thing, before we do the most expensive thing, which is just concrete. Unfortunately, as anyone who's followed infrastructure in the US knows, we tend to take a concrete first approach. We try to solve our problems by throwing money at them, and we do concrete before any sort of organization changes, which often means organization changes don't happen at all. The best example, we've all seen a city somewhere that has a shiny new rail line, a light rail line, or something like that, that has no service, or it has very poor service. And this Penn expansion is the perfect example of concrete first. It would have been spending a tremendous amount of money so that every train operator, New Jersey Transit, the Long Island Railroad, and Amtrak, can operate the way they've operated for years and not have to change anything of the way they do. Will spend all this money and not improve anything. Uh, won't change anything. And there are a whole host of little things that can be changed that actually take a lot of load off of Penn Station. Amtrak's whole assumption here. This is a chart that they had in their documents, and it's a perfect example. They were arguing that it takes between 15 and 22 minutes to turn a train. 15 minutes if it's going through the station, 22 minutes if it's going out of service. And to be blunt, anyone who's ridden the subway or seen a fast turn on a train knows that that's not true. This is by far, not true. And anyone certainly who's ridden the Elizabeth line in Paris or the excuse me in London or the RER in Paris, you know, knows that this isn't true. This is something that we can change with operational. We don't need to do things like brake checks on a train that's going through. We don't need to do and we don't need to have crew briefings if the crew is running through or another crew is taking over on the train. These are stuff that can be changed, and they're done on other Federal Railroad Administration regulated railroads like PATH. Um, it's funny, indeed, as of 2014, before so about 10 years before this document, Amtrak only budgeted 10 minutes for a train to go out of service at Penn Station. This is a really pessimistic view that seems designed to really not want to change how they do things. Um, and perfect. Our answer basically comes down to better operations. Some of these are little things, like on the Amtrak side, for instance. The express Acela trains have to pass regional trains at a certain point, and they are scheduled to pass them at Penn Station in New York. This means that regional trains going through New York often have a 30-minute wait, which is not a great use of space. You're using the most expensive real estate in the world to let trains pass one another when that can be done anywhere else. You have the same idea with things like, reloading cafe cars and stuff like that. So when we talk about better operations, I will say, we are mostly talking on the regional rail side, as well, the Long Island Railroad and New Jersey Transit and regional things. And there's lots that can be done better. Schedule simplification in what's called a TACT, for instance. A TACT just means trains come at the same running a certain route, arrive at the same times every hour. So maybe 15, 30, and 45 minutes past the hour plus on the hour. This greatly simplifies things for riders, obviously. You know when your train's going to show up, but it also simplifies scheduling. It allows trains to merge much easier. It allows trains to recover from bad situations much easier, and it really increases transfer potential because trains are meeting at similar points throughout the hour. And then when you move on from kind of the organization, you start to say you spend smartly. You do things that the region has not done. You you build high platforms everywhere. These are inexpensive. They are, and they not only, do things like increase accessibility for people with mobility impairments of any sort, or people with luggage. They also can take what would have been a few minutes at a station and turn them into, on a rush hour train and turn it into something like 30 seconds. Uh, Electrification. Electric trains are not only cheaper to operate, even including the installation over their lifetime, or better for the environment, but they accelerate so much faster, especially for trains going across the region that are making a number of stops. This means, you're saving minutes every stop. It means you can run trains, local trains today that are almost as fast or faster than today's express trains on these things. This greatly improves throughput, this greatly improves service. Um, and to do that, then you maybe do some strategic investments in bottlenecks, things like some of the interlockings in the region where, trains right now are meeting at grade and they have to wait for each other to pass. And for spending relatively modest sums of money compared to $17 billion to rip down a block of Midtown Manhattan, you're all of a sudden improving passenger flow and travel throughout the region, and you're easing the load on Penn Station at the same time. Um, we talk about uh, Penn, and our main thing here is that one of the other sticking points when people talk about through running at Penn is the narrow platforms. And the truth is that Penn Station's platforms are relatively narrow, but they can do the job. Um, the main thing that you would have to do is there are a lot of them, and the main thing you do is, as we did in our scheduling and modeling, is ensure that you schedule trains so that basically only one train comes into each side of each track on the platform, each side at a time, and there's a 5-minute gap between them. That gives plenty of time for people to load and unload. It gives plenty of time to for vertical circulation. And as I'll show in a minute with some of our stuff, it does not cause tremendous crowding. One of the things we talk about sometimes is fire code. The NFPA 130 is the section about the fire code that talks about transit and how to do this. Right now, Penn is not compliant with it. If you implemented this system of scheduling into platforms, it would become compliant today, giving enough people enough time to get off the platforms in case of an emergency. There's also other things that could be done. If you extend the central concourse, you could get increased vertical circulation. But again, it comes down to also changing practices. We need no more silly procedures like lines for trains at Penn Station. Trains are not planes. They do not require everyone to board through a single door. You have people go down, wait for their train, get on and off, and you make good use of this very, very expensive real estate. We've done a lot of modeling based on observations and based on how people actually use the station now on the platforms. And, I'm not going to bore people with all the details. We can talk a bit about it later if people are really curious. But basically, well, there are always a few stragglers. People clear the platform within 2 to 3 minutes for the most part in Penn Station today. And this is with people mostly preferring the 7th Avenue side, greatly preferring going towards the busier side of Midtown. And you can run the full 48 trains per hour through that Gateway will provide on the existing platforms without having any sort of unusual crowding. It'll be a bit crowded, but it'll be crowded like the subway or like any of the commuter trains are today. 40 and let's say it's 48 trains per hour with plenty of room to spare. There's plenty of room to spare for the few long distance trains that might need more time to load and unload because of people carrying heavy luggage or things like that. Plenty of time for plenty of space for recovery from delays and things like that. So what does this mean for Penn Station going forward? Um, you know, uh, Once again, the changes that need to be done at Penn, first and foremost, are not about the physical structure of Penn. They are about the organization. They are about how we run trains through here, how we make better systems. It goes back to that organization before electronics, before concrete. Um, this is not me saying that Penn Station is perfect by any means. if there's money and people want to do it, there may well be a desire to, over time, rebuild for wider platforms and obviously to do better architecture. If we do that, we may want to do better interlockings and things like that. That could also speed the trip. And this is stuff that could be made easier if you move Madison Square Garden and stuff like that. But the fundamental case is none of it's necessary for through running. None of it's necessary to maximize the capacity. The necessary things are mostly much cheaper things around the New York City area that could unlock all this capacity for both regional and intercity trains. Um, the federal government, Amtrak, and the federal government have put Andy Byford in charge, former director of New York City Transit, amongst others, in charge of the Penn Station project. Andy Byford actually oversaw the completion of the Elizabeth line in London. He's talked fondly about the importance of through running before. He knows a lot about this. But obviously, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of about getting organizations to cooperate, about getting things to come together and do this. And, we all know how tense the political situation is right now, and there's a lot of real questions that can even, the best transit mind in the, one of the best transit minds in practice right now be able to push to do what needs to be done. And I'll just conclude by saying what I just said, that whatever happens, operations must come first. We all know, and I know people who do high-speed rail and people who follow this know that rail can be expensive. It should be cheaper than it is. We need to learn how to get our costs down. This is a major thing, but even still, no matter what our costs are, we need to get the most out of our investments, especially our investments in super expensive infrastructure like central city stations, like Penn. And that requires using what we have to the best of our capability, getting organizations to cooperate and doing things like that. Architecture is great. Personally, outside of, my work outside of ETA, I'm a big fan of public space. I'm a big fan of things. We can talk about all the plans for Penn and their positives and negatives as architecture. But we have to make sure we are bringing transportation value, or we are not actually improving things other than where we're waiting before we catch a bad service. We need to increase the service. And to do that, we ultimately need to change organizational practice to get effective transit. Uh, Penn has a lot of potential in this place that exists right now. We just have to make sure we utilize it. So yeah, I want to say thanks to the High Speed Rail Alliance for having me. If you're interested in this, and we'll talk more, but we go into a lot more details on our website. You can read our reports. So please visit us, follow our social media, and if you have any questions for us that we do not get a chance to deal with in the Q&A here, you can always reach out to us, and we're happy to talk to you. But yeah, thanks for having us, and I'd love to have a conversation about this stuff.
So thank you very much. This is very interesting. So it's an issue that I've not paid as much attention to as I'd like. But I spent last August, first of all, not relevant to today, but my first time at a Penn Station was on a late Lakeshore Limited in 91. And coming up during the middle of rush hour into the old concourse, with all those people crammed in there, and somebody, I'm not sure it was a Jersey or Brooklyn accent, calling the trains. I'm like, this is what railroad should be. This is exciting. But you know, my trip there this past August was interesting because Moynihan looks pretty, and it's a great place feeling when you get on the train. But when I saw the line, I'm like, I'm not going to bother with this. So I went to the old concourse, and like the old days, I went down the escalator when it started working. I got on my train and sat on the train for 15 minutes while everybody went down the other stairs. So So your base assumption that you start with operations is absolutely correct. And you start thinking about through running. Absolutely correct. Now, I spent a good 2 hours walking every platform and going through every entrance to every platform, maybe three. Tell me more about why you can do this with the existing platform layout.
Yeah, sure. And just as like that is a classic New York move. That's a classic expert move that you go down to the other concourse and go down. That is, because this is inane. Yeah. So, you know, uh, we, there is no doubt those platforms are small and crowded. The biggest thing is uh, we model it, as I say, we basically the simplest way to take about it is rather than you try very hard when scheduling never to have two trains on the platform at one side on either side. You try to stagger them so that only one train is coming off and one train is going in. Um, there's a lot of um, discussion about I can go through the specifics of like it takes about a second per person per door to exit the train, and uh, and then you have vertical circulation and all that. And we use this whole um, here. Let me bring up the charts. If people are familiar with the idea of level of service as used in highway engineering, where A is there's no thing at all, there's no uh, interruption at all. B is there's flow, but there's a little bit of interruption, and so on and so forth till you get F and people are packed in and can't move. There's something similar for crowd conditions. And we went through and extensively modeled this for various types of things for trains coming every little bit. And even if you watch the platforms at Penn Station today, um, the vast majority of people clear the platform within 2 minutes, maybe three at the outside. Uh, the there's and that there's only really about a minute and a half of really strong thing, and it's crowded, but it's crowded in the way the subway is crowded, is how I would describe it. It's a lot of people going through a space and not enough time, but the flow never breaks down. It's never over the top. It's never anything like that. Um, and the truth of the matter is, if you do this, there's plenty of time for other people to get down and wait and board trains. One of the other one of the critiques of this, I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, is that, well, okay, that's great, but it doesn't leave time for people to board the train. Well, there's two facts about this, and this is especially true for regional service, that one direction will be much larger than the other at any given time. In the morning, most people are still going to be going into Manhattan, even though there are people going to be doing regional trips. So that really solves a lot of these capacity issues. Uh, but, you know, basically, the numbers don't lie. If you let people go down and do this, as we see, and we see this during when mishaps happen, when there's delays, that people can clear and get on these platforms actually really quickly and really thin. Um, and I will say, there's a question going forward about, um, you know, how crowded do you want this grand station to be? What experience do you want? Uh, that to me is more of an architectural question in this regard, because you say, okay, we want it to be a great experience, we want this. But if you're willing to say, okay, it's going to be normally crowded for a city, not necessarily shoulder to shoulder, but we're all walking the same way and it's a bit of things. The platforms with just a little bit of finesse can actually handle it right now. I hope that answers your question.
So, so it's a matter of it can do a lot more than it's doing today. It's probably unpleasant. It's not ideal, because of the column supporting, in large part because the platforms weren't designed well in the first place. And second of all, because you got a bunch of columns supporting a Coliseum on top of it. So
Yeah,
it's
and you don't,
doable.
and this is one of those things where like, yes, and if you add vertical circulation, i.e. stairs, escalators, elevators more, that makes it easier. The columns do make it harder, but there is space to do some of that. This is the one thing, a lot of transit people were very skeptical of Moynihan because it was a lot of money to not add capacity. It didn't do anything for the actual trains. But the one thing it did do was, which was important, was both add a number of new escalators, elevators, and stairs that made it a lot easier to empty the platforms. And it also was a draw. It helps encourage people. Okay, maybe I'll go out the less crowded 8th Avenue side and into Moynihan just for a second, to do this. And that helps bring down any sort of crowding on the platforms. Um, you know, uh, the real, you know, the real key is you can run a lot more trains than we do today through Penn Station with a lot more people. And the answer to this is look at the subway, which does it every day on platforms that aren't much bigger, you know. Um,
So,
and Go ahead.
sorry. So it's doable. It would be great if we could. I will continue to advocate for getting rid of Madison Square Garden, but
Oh,
I understand it.
yeah, no, no, no. And like, there's another plan. So, like, one of the things that was put up and if you want to reorganize the platforms, there's a lot of space within the existing site. And one of the things we like to harp on is even if you want to do that, you don't need to rip down the block across the street. You don't need to rip down this block of Midtown Manhattan. If you really decide you need to, there was a plan put out by New Jersey Transit to build basically one more platform and two more tracks. They call it tracks A and B, which would be under 31st Street. And you wouldn't need to rip down the block, and you could do that, and that would give extra capacity during any reconstruction of the platforms, if you needed it.
Okay. So then the next hurdle that we hear a lot about is the fact that there's two different types of third rail. There's overhead. There's multiple currents in those third rails and overheads, and there's multiple signaling systems. Uh, Um, and I got the impression from something I thought you guys wrote that Long Island Railroad has a different loading gauge than the rest of them, but I could be wrong.
So
So
yeah,
how do you get a train that goes everywhere, or do you?
You, the truth of the matter is, we basically already have a train that goes everywhere, within reason. It's called it's the M8 that's used on Metro North right now on the New Haven line. What I'll say is, yeah, you're absolutely right to bring this up. There are a number of different systems. There's two types of third rail, over and under running. And then for the overhead catenary, there are numerous types of electricity that go on and stuff. And what, the truth of the matter is, once you have an electric train, the actual cost to make an electric train that can run on all these different types of power is incredibly minimal. Like, it's really easy with modern electronics to take electricity in one form and change it to another. It really is a rounding error in the cost of the trains. Um, and, uh, you know, that is, a major thing. There is a little bit of a loading gauge issue through the 63rd Street tunnel, which goes to Grand Central Madison, the new thing under Grand Central, in that it has a very low ceiling. But there are plenty of British style trains that are made today that are available with both adjustable third rails that can run on both over and under running and have pantographs that could fit through that tunnel. What I like to say is this is basically a solved problem, for the trains. The signal system is basically compatible throughout. Um, they are different, but you don't even need you can always change crews, for instance. When the RER in Paris started, and you had two separate railroads that would meet in the middle, one train would pull in, the crew would change over, the passengers wouldn't even notice because it would take a minute, and it would continue with the crew for the other side. You don't need to merge organizations or do anything like that. You don't need to do that sort of thing. You just need the agreement to do it and make it transparent to the passengers. Um, Nor do you need to replace all the trains at once. We have a lot of trains that can already do most of this. And basically, if you start over 20, 30 years to implement through running, if you just go over the natural replacement cycle for the trains and you start buying the trains that can run everywhere, which really do not cost anything uh, compared to anything else, uh, that is and indeed, even if they don't plan on through running, which would be a tremendous mistake, just the operational benefits of ordering trains that can run anywhere on the system is a huge thing, because then in any sort of if you have to move trains around, if you have uh, a delay somewhere, or you have a major incident and you need capacity somewhere else, you can move stuff around. Yeah, as I say, there are technical challenges. There are, but it isn't like we need to redo the entire electrical system. It isn't like we need to redo the entire signal system. Most of the system is accessed based on the same old Pennsylvania Railroad, the New York Central Railroad pulse codes underneath with a super layer of computer stuff. If we did have crews that went all the way through, they would need a little cross training, but that's well within doing. This is stuff that's doable and has been done all over the world to this point.
So one last one from me, which is the million-dollar question. How do you make the politics on this work and get it pushed through?
That is the hardest thing, and that is what, we have been here at ETA fighting for as long as we've been around to do. Um, the real key is we need to convince people that this is important and this is the way to work. And it's great to have us. This is one of the reasons it's great that the Elizabeth line has been such a success, that we can point to it and say, see how much ridership you get from this. Because really, this is not going to happen until the politicians, especially the governors of New York and New Jersey, realize, wait, we are, you know, is it worth it to protect our fiefdoms, or is it better to cooperate and create a better system for everybody involved? And yeah, that's a huge thing to overcome. I don't want to say not, but it is going to have to come from people making it clear that, like, you know, hey, for less money, we can improve service for everybody. We, can do this. And there's lots of things. This is great. We can point to, the benefits of this, the just the equity benefits, or just the transportation benefits. Imagine, someone who, living on Long Island, who wants to go to college in Rutgers and can take the train. Or imagine living in Westchester, north of New York City, and going to Newark Airport on a one or two seat ride. These are things that would make the region so much more cohesive. It would open up, a lot of communities for housing. As I'm sure people who have been to New York have seen, like the Jersey City skyline is huge because it's a huge job center now, and it would make this accessible to a whole lot more of the region. It would make all of the job centers around a whole lot more accessible. And all these benefits are really strong. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's a better experience for riders. It gives them better service. It connects more to them. It gives better things. And all these things are, need to be keep being repeated to the people in charge to say, hey, you know, we have the ability to do this. It's not going to cost much money. Let's do it. And that's the type of thing that, hopefully can make a politician listen and start to say, yeah, I'm going to select people to start pushing for this. There are plenty of people in the MTA, in New Jersey Transit, who understand the importance of this. There are plenty of people who are also very protective of their own little way they do things in their own thing. And, it's an idea of, selecting the right people and getting the people involved to understand the importance and push for it.
Excellent. Chris, is it any, I know there's lots of questions. Can we boil it down to one or two?
There's actually lots of comment, not so many questions. But yeah, there are, let's do a couple at least. Daniel asks, would there be a need for more rail yards both in New Jersey and Long Island to accommodate through running?
So my understanding is not. I'm sure one of our there's some of our technical some of the people who've worked on a lot of our reports in the chat who are trying to answer this. Uh, Indeed, one of the advantages of through running is that you can use the yards that exist on both sides much more efficiently. In other words, you know, you can take a train, running from the Stamford yard out in Stamford, Connecticut, or the New Haven yard and have it run all the way through down to a New Jersey transit facility, and then maybe it comes back later. Indeed, if anything, it's quite the opposite. You're making better use of the stuff you have right now. Um, there may be some minor technical things that need to be done to the yards, for things like uh, electrical systems or stuff like that. But those are compared to the cost of new yards or new tunnels or things are very small operational issues.
Okay, thanks. And then related to operational issues, Johan asks, what kind of upgrades were made during the construction back in 2018 and 2019 when Amtrak detoured to Grand Central Station? Do either of you know?
That was improvements to the Empire Connector, if I remember correctly, which was so. The Empire Connector was a relatively recent thing that allowed the former New York Central West Side line, which goes down the west side of Manhattan, to come into Penn Station. It actually used to serve what is today the High Line and be a freight line. And that allows trains to go all the way north to Albany. And they were doing a lot of repairs and reconstruction in that tunnel. And I think just about the actual merge into Penn Station, where those tracks merge into Penn. Um, and so during that time, until 1991, trains north of New York to Albany, actually, Amtrak trains went from Grand Central. When this was built, it was done to consolidate operations. I don't know, I think that was normal maintenance stuff. I don't think that anything was done, and it's kind of unfortunate to actually increase capacity. Uh, those tunnels on the west side of Manhattan are not electrified. Uh, they should not cost a lot to electrify, but they are not, and stuff like that, that it, slows service and limits capacity and that sort of thing. Um, but yeah, that was mostly about, kind of standard service repair type of thing. There's an ancient, the Spuyten Duyvil Bridge at the northern tip of Manhattan, where that line goes over and connects into the Bronx and into what is Metro North's Hudson line to go up, is an old swing bridge that often needs work. I don't remember exactly what happened that they were working on. This is going to happen again uh, with other things. Well, actually, the other thing is going to happen. Like one of the things that I didn't get a chance to mention in the presentation for time, but I'll throw out there now is effectively a lot of trains at Penn Station through run today. They just don't through run efficiently. A lot of Long Island Railroad trains come in and then go to the West Side Yard, um, which is now underneath Hudson Yards, mostly. A lot of New Jersey Transit and Amtrak trains come in and then they go all the way to Sunnyside Yard in Queens and stop. Uh, and this is sort of through the least effective form of through running because you need to stop the train, make sure everybody's off of it, clear it, do all the stuff you want to do, and then go out and do it. It's much better to just keep going and run people through it. You spend less time in the expensive platform, in the expensive center city, and you create a better service for people.
I just got to say, it's not, I think it's completely nuts that they run trains through that way, but don't run them beyond.
They don't let people, I mean, and again, like there's also, when I talk about operations, like, and Amtrak is part of this, like, I'll pick a little thing like refilling the cafe car, for instance. There's no reason for that necessarily to be done in Penn Station. Like it's convenient for Amtrak operations, but that can be done anywhere along the route. And indeed, it's better to do it somewhere where space is and cheaper for everybody to do it somewhere space is less of a concern. And these are the type of little things that if you start chipping away, you make big differences in operations, you know? Um,
Okay, thanks. Let's see if we can do maybe two more. You both, or you talked a bit about the politics of this a few minutes ago, and this question actually came in before that, but there's a little aspect to it that I wanted to bring in. Alan, a member of our technical committee, asks essentially, do you have any advice for Andy Byford or thoughts about how he should navigate the politics of all this?
oh, um, yeah, sure. And it's a very delicate thing, given this political moment right now. I mean, obviously, there would always be friction between a Republican administration and a democratically led New York State and New Jersey, almost certainly after, and that would require delicacy no matter what. Uh, Obviously, these are very heated times. And my advice to him is the same. He knows the benefits of this. He knows the things from his time in London and from elsewhere. He's also, if you talk to anyone who's ever met him, he's a good guy. He's a peacemaker. My advice is do that. Be the peacemaker here between everybody. Say, listen, whatever big things are going on in the world that we disagree on, you know, let's try to work together on something that we actually can work together and deliver positive benefits for. That's probably the tact I would take if I were him. I would, you know, uh, he's got a lot of uh, and in this, he's got a lot of power as the person at Amtrak doing this, because to this point, Amtrak's been really heavily pushing the expansion thing of not changing things. And he has the power to change that conversation, you know? And if we change that conversation, that's good. Um, and my only concern to him would be, we live in a very politicized time. We live in a time where issues very quickly become partisan political footballs, right or wrong. That's above my pay grade, and you don't want this to turn into one of those. You have to tread very carefully. You don't want to be part of a war between the federal government and either of the states, because that's going to end bad. That's going to cause people to entrench themselves really difficultly. You don't want, and is that an impossible balance? I don't know. It's going to be a very difficult job. And I got to be honest, I don't envy Byford's position right now. I think any other time he's the right guy for the job. I just don't envy the current political situation he's found in. Uh, but if he can help bring New York and New Jersey together as a peacemaker, and Connecticut and even the federal government, that would be the path I would take.
All right. Well, that was such a good answer. Let's wrap it up there. But any Rick or Blair, any final thoughts here?
No, well, so, Blair, again, thank you very much. This is such an important issue.
Yeah.
And for the audience, there is an opportunity now to influence a new direction, like there are with so many projects across the country that may have been headed in the wrong way. We now have an opportunity to get it in a better way. And so we really need to push on this issue to get Penn Station really being an effective place for the economic capital of the Western Hemisphere. So thank you all for being interested in high-speed and regional rail. Thank you for joining us. Again, we are supported by our members, folks like you who want really great trains. So if you liked this presentation and want more of them, hit the Become a Member button. And we look forward to our next presentations. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having us. Yep,
Yep.
really great. Thank you.